Princess Dracula, Book 1, Part 12, Special Online Series, author John Patrick Kennedy. She could hear a squirrel, silent to any normal person, skittering up a tree trunk. The owl huffed in a breath, its heart beating faster than a human's. Ruxandra closed her eyes and listened. There were a dozen other small hearts beating nearby, other wings floating and flapping through the forest, and little feet skittering nearby. Farther off, the hooves of deer tapped against hard earth, and the near-silent paws of wolves padded after them in the dusk. Ruxandra opened her eyes, then shifted them to the sky again. What am I seeing here? It is all so beautiful, so divine. Why did I have to become a monster to see all this? She had no answer, so she clasped her hands in front of her and prayed for forgiveness. She prayed for guidance and understanding of what she had become. She prayed to not hurt anyone else ever again. She was still praying when the sky lightened, and she was driven once more into the earth to sleep and hide until darkness came again. When she came out the next night, she was hungry. It was only the stirring of hunger, the first lightest pang, and with it came absolute terror. I will not, please God, do not let me kill again. Her prayers became frantic, desperate cries to God to give her the strength to resist the hunger until she withered away into nothingness. She forced herself to stay on her knees. She clenched her hands tight and prayed out loud, hoping the noise would drown out her hunger. She tried to focus only on God and his divine works so that she might not kill again and find redemption. When the sun neared the horizon, she retreated once more into her cave. She wrapped both hands around her belly and curled into a ball. She let sleep take her and hoped it would be enough. It wasn't. She awoke ravenous. Her body screamed its hunger at her, desperate for her to fill it. She closed her eyes and tried to pray, but every time she did, Lusa's neck was ready and waiting for her. She could smell the sweat on the woman's body, could feel the woman's heart beating, and when she sank her teeth in, she could taste. No! Ruxandra dropped to the earth, pushing her face hard against the dirt, rubbing it back and forth as if the pain and the cold might somehow drive the hunger away. Please, God, don't let me do this. Please, God, don't let me do this. Please, God, don't let me do this. She could trace her steps back to the village. She was sure of it. She could be there well before sunrise if she ran. And when she got there, I won't. You hear me? I won't do it. I will not kill another. No! The scream was so loud it startled the birds in the trees and sent a squirrel skittering out and leaping from one frozen branch to the next. Squirrel. Ruxandra pulled her face from the earth and listened. There was a squirrel in a tree, not 20 yards from her and still fat from its autumn gorge of nuts. It stared back at her with black, curious eyes. Its claws were dug into the tree, its entire body tense and ready to run away the moment Ruxandra moved. God gave man dominion over every living thing that walks on the earth. She could hear the squirrel's little heart racing. I can feed off the squirrel, if I can catch it. She straightened slowly. She wasn't a hunter. She didn't know how to hunt like the men who used to bring deer to her father's court. She had no idea how to move so she wouldn't startle the squirrel. So she ran. As fast as her legs could take her, she ran, racing to the tree and jumping for the branch where the squirrel sat. The squirrel saw her coming and was gone long before she reached the tree. It scrabbled higher up to sit among branches too thin to support the girl's weight. Ruxandra growled. She turned her back to the tree, then sat down hard. She had to eat, had to catch something before her body drove her back to the village. She glared at the squirrel a moment longer, then closed her eyes and listened. Stupid thing. There was another fast and light heartbeat less than a dozen yards away. Ruxandra opened her eyes and stared until she spotted the rabbit under a patch of brambles. It watched her too. She climbed to her feet again. Instead of going toward the rabbit, she angled sideways. The rabbit stayed in its hiding spot. Ruxandra drew closer until she was no more than 5 yards away. She turned and sprang, overshooting the rabbit by 30 feet. Ruxandra was so surprised by how far she'd jumped that she lost her balance and fell face first onto the ground. The rabbit sprinted away, heading for the woods. Ruxandra scrambled to her feet and chased after the rabbit, a flash of brown fur and long ears amid the white of the ground. Its feet kicked up little puffs of snow as it dashed away from her. Ruxandra sped up, crashing into trees and jumping over underbrush. She lost her balance twice more and jumped past the rabbit several times. "Just give up!" The rabbit weaved through the trees, changing directions a dozen times. It dove into one side of a bush and raced out the other. It ducked under a fallen tree, changed direction and shot between Ruxandra's legs. She tried to grab the creature and fell over, spinning and crashing into a tree. She yelped, then jumped to her feet. The rabbit dashed farther into the underbrush. Ruxandra chased it, heedless of the scratches and rips to her dress and slapping branches that threatened to hit her eyes. The rabbit slowed, changing direction more often to confuse her and stay out of her grasp. Ruxandra got within arm's length, lost sight of it, found it again, and came closer and closer. Then the rabbit jumped the wrong direction, and Ruxandra's hand caught one of its legs. "Ha ha!" The rabbit kicked furiously, struggling to escape her grip. Ruxandra grabbed its neck with her other hand and stretched it long. The rabbit screamed. It was a terrible sound, like a child in agony. It was almost enough to make Ruxandra drop the poor creature. Instead, she sank her teeth into its tiny neck. The blood slipped down her throat. It wasn't enough, nowhere near enough. But it was warm and filled with the rabbit's desperate struggle for life. Ruxandra savoured every drop as she sucked on the rabbit's neck. The life faded from the creature, becoming a small, limp handful of fur. Such a little life. She felt a rush of guilt and sadness and other emotions she had no time to dwell on. The rabbit just wanted to live, to survive another day in this cruel, harsh, unforgiving world. She took that away, but now it was free. Would it forgive her? Could it? She suddenly realized that she'll steal many more lives the longer she lives. Sorrow and guilt will be forever with her now. But maybe she'll get used to it. She gently laid the rabbit on the ground and looked around. She had no idea where she was. The woods were thicker and dense with underbrush. A large river roared and rumbled despite the cold. She closed her eyes again, trying to ignore the river, listening instead for the heartbeats of small animals. There had to be more somewhere. If she could just... There! She moved slowly, listening hard. This one was beneath the snow and smaller even than the rabbit. She walked until she was sure she was right above it, then plunged her hand into the snow, grabbing hard and fast and ending up with a handful of furry rage. The weasel sank its teeth into her, thrashing its head back and forth to rip her skin. Ruxandra screamed and dropped it. The weasel ran across the snow and disappeared. Ruxandra cradled her hand and gritted her teeth until the wound healed. By then, the weasel was too far to be worth chasing, even if she were willing to risk being bitten again. "This is ridiculous," grumped Ruxandra. "I can destroy a group of knights, but can't grab a sheety weasel." Ruxandra was still hungry. She closed her eyes, listened again, and then began walking. Stupid weasel! The river grew louder, making it harder to listen for heartbeats, but Ruxandra was certain of one close by. She was rewarded with a flash of movement as another rabbit dashed out from under cover and ran from her. She chased again, doing a better job of avoiding the trees and the underbrush. The rabbit zigged and zagged and the river grew louder in her ears. She caught glimpses of it between the trees. It was wide and grey with slushy snow. Its water raced between the walls of the ravine, roaring as it went. The rabbit ran straight for the river. "You little..." Ruxandra put on a burst of speed and reached for the animal, determined to drink it. The rabbit changed direction right at the edge of the river. Ruxandra tried to do the same, but had too much momentum. Her feet skidded on the snow. She flung out an arm, trying to find something to grasp, but her fingers closed over air and she plunged into the river. Ruxandra hit the water, colder than the night air or snowy ground, like a stone. The current grabbed and held her fast, dragging her through the water. She pulled at the water and tried to break the surface, but the river was stronger than she was. It dragged her mercilessly on, ripping her skin on rock and fallen branches. Part of her hair got caught on something, twisted and tore from her head, making her scream into the racing water. Her talons came out and ripped along the rocks as she struggled to gain control. The water around her became frothier and obscured her vision. She slammed into a rock, then another, tearing skin and spilling blood into the raging water. Then her head was above water and she fell through the air.